Okay, so today we're going deep on Mary Wollstonecraft, and I think for a lot of people, when they hear that name, they think feminism, right? I mean, she was writing in the late 1700s, and she was already making waves with some pretty radical ideas for the time.
Yeah, she was way ahead of the curve. I mean, if you really dig into her work, you realize it's not just about advocating for women's rights. It's a deep dive into human relationships. Like she was trying to figure out how society works, how people interact, and especially in her time, when everything's changing so rapidly with this new commercial society popping up. It's like she's asking, what does it even mean to be human in this crazy new world?
It's so true, and it's funny because everyone knows her for Daisy, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, 1792 is like the feminist Bible
Yeah, it's
almost.
a classic.
But she wrote so much more than that, right?
Yeah,
We're
right.
talking education, politics, history. I mean, the woman was prolific. She wrote reviews, translations, pamphlets. She even wrote novels. She was all over the place.
She really was. And her influence goes way beyond just those traditional philosophy circles. I mean, her travel writing, that book about her trip to Scandinavia, that actually shaped how people wrote about travel for years to come. And then you have her ideas about imagination. They fed right into the romantic movement that was just starting to take off.
Wow. So to break it down for our deep dive today, I'm thinking we can trace her intellectual journey. Start with her early life and how her thinking developed. Then we can move into her ideas about education. Those were revolutionary. Then, of course, we got to hit her moral and political philosophy. We can't skip over her back and forth with Edmund Burke. I mean, come on, that's classic. And finally, we'll round it out by looking at the stuff she wrote about aesthetics and epistemology. The stuff that goes beyond the political. It's all part of this bigger picture of showing just how complex and insightful she really was.
I like it. Let's do it.
Okay, so back to the beginning. It's like origin story time. So Wollstonecraft, she's born in London, 1759, second kid out of seven. Rough start, right? Because her family, they hit some hard times. Her dad wasn't so good with money, and they lost pretty much everything.
Yeah, it was rough. And the crazy thing is, only her brother got to go to school, like get a proper education.
Which makes her whole story even more amazing, right? I mean, her education was all over the place, but you can't deny she was brilliant. I mean, she knew the Bible inside and out, and she even knew all about the ancient philosophers. I heard she got some of that knowledge from Thomas Taylor, the guy who translated Plato.
Oh, yeah, he was a big deal back then.
Totally. But it's not like she was stuck in the past. I mean, she was reading Shakespeare and Milton and all the big names from that era. And then on top of that, she was reviewing for the Analytical Review. Talk about a crash course in all the latest ideas.
She was soaking it all up, wasn't she?
For sure. It's not like she was just teaching herself, though. It sounds like she had some friends who were really important in helping her learn. There was this retired clergyman and his wife who kind of mentored her. But let's be real, being a woman in those days, especially when your family's struggling financially, it's not like there were tons of options for her. She did what most women did back then. She was a lady's companion, a teacher, even a governess for a while.
Typical stuff for a woman of her class, yeah.
Totally. But here's the thing. Her life was full of these intense experiences that I bet really shaped how she thought about the world. But think about it. She took care of her mom when she was sick. She lost her best friend, Fanny Blood. And then there's her sister, Eliza, who walked out on her marriage, which was pretty scandalous back then. All this stuff makes you think she was a woman who knew her own mind and wasn't afraid to stand up for what she believed in.
Yeah, no kidding.
So then we come to this really pivotal moment in her life. This is when she meets Reverend Richard Price. He's a big deal because he's part of the dissenting community over at Newington Green. The nonconformists, the people who didn't play by the rules. And they were always pushing for social and political change.
Yeah, they were always stirring the pot.
For sure. And this is huge for Wollstonecraft because she starts defending Price's ideas. And through him, she meets Joseph Johnson. He becomes her publisher. He's like her ticket to getting her ideas out there.
He's a key player in her story, for sure.
Absolutely. And then you have to factor in all her travels. I mean, she went to Portugal for a while. That's actually where Fanny Blood died.
Yeah.
Tragic, right. But the whole experience really soured her on Portugal. She didn't like how much power the church had, and she just thought the whole place was kind of irrational.
You can see how all these experiences start to feed into her writing.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And all this time, she's still dealing with money problems. It's interesting because her first book, Thoughts on the Education of Daughters, that came out in 1787. It wasn't a huge hit, but it got some attention.
Yeah.
And in that book, She's already laying the groundwork for a lot of the stuff she'll become famous for later on.
Hmm.
She's talking about moral discipline and how all these artificial social rules are actually holding people back, especially women. It's like she's saying, these fancy manners and all this etiquette's all just a bunch of BS.
Yeah, she was calling out the hypocrisy.
Totally.
And we can't forget about all the translating she did. I mean, Necker, Saltzman, de Cambon, she translated all of them. But it wasn't just like a word-for-word thing. She was really grappling with their ideas, and you can see how she kind of molded the translations to fit with her own philosophy. It's like she was having this conversation with these other thinkers, even though they were from different times and spoke different languages.
That's a really cool way to think about it.
Yeah.
Like she was building on their ideas and making them her own.
Yeah.
And then there's her work with the analytical review. She was a reviewer and an editor for a good chunk of time. And that meant she was reading everything, like Leibniz, Kant, Rousseau, you name it. I find it kind of ironic because she was really critical of novels.
Oh.
She thought they could be bad for your morals, but she was still reviewing tons of them, along with everything else from poetry to, like, serious theological stuff.
That's right. She wasn't afraid to engage with ideas she disagreed with.
Exactly. And it's amazing how all of this stuff, her life, her reading, her writing, it all comes together in her philosophy of education.
That's all connected.
So let's dig into that a little bit. I mean, her early books like Thoughts on the Education of Daughters and Original Stories from Real Life, you can see Locke all over them. Locke, the guy who said reason should rule over instinct and that habits you form as a kid really shape who you become.
Yeah, he was all about that blank slate idea. Like, we're born empty and experience shapes us.
Exactly. And Wollstonecraft, she takes that and runs with it. She's basically saying that women seem less intelligent because they haven't had the same opportunities to learn. It's not that they're actually less capable, it's that they've been held back.
Yeah, it's the classic nature versus nurture debate. She's firmly on the side of nurture.
Totally.
Right.
And in Original Stories, it's almost like she's putting her educational theory into practice. You've got these two characters, Mary and Caroline, and they're being educated by this wise tutor. It's like a how-to guide for raising kids.
A very hands-on approach.
For sure. But here's the thing. While she liked Locke, she wasn't afraid to disagree with him. Like, Locke thought kids shouldn't hang out with other kids too much.
Yeah, he thought they'd pick up bad habits.
Right. But Wollstonecraft, she thought the opposite. She was all about kids learning from each other. And she even thought boys and girls should be educated together. I mean, God, that was radical for the 1700s.
Super radical.
Totally. And you see this focus on reason running through all her early work. And then, boom, it explodes in her life. A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. Some people even think that book is basically a treatise on education. Like, it's all about how to raise girls to be strong, independent thinkers.
Yeah, it's about so much more than just rights. It's about developing the whole person.
Absolutely. She was really big on girls developing what she called inner resources. It's like she's saying, don't just teach them facts and figures. Teach them how to be resilient, how to rely on themselves, how to deal with whatever life throws at them.
She wanted them to be able to think for themselves.
Exactly. And underpinning all of this is her belief that people are basically good. Like deep down, we all want to be kind and do the right thing. And she believed in God, too. Like, she thought there was a divine plan for the universe.
So it wasn't all just cold, hard reason for her. She had a spiritual side, too.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And that comes out in her views on raising kids. She thought you had to find that sweet spot. Not too strict, not too lenient. Like, she didn't believe in hitting kids unless they did something really bad, like being cruel to animals. But she also didn't like baby talk. She thought it messed up their language development. It's all about balance,
Yeah, finding that middle ground.
Totally.
Yeah.
So what was she trying to achieve with all this? It wasn't just about having well-behaved kids, right? There was a bigger goal.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. She said the whole point of education is to prepare kids for what she called the main business of our lives, which is becoming virtuous, and to give them the strength to deal with all the crap that life throws at you. It's like she's saying education is about building character, and the ultimate goal is self-mastery. It's about being in control of yourself, both mentally and physically.
It's like she's creating a roadmap for living a good life.
That's a great way to put it.
But she wasn't all about being serious and disciplined all the time, was she?
No, not at all. She thought joy was important, too. She hated what she called Spartan discipline, like super harsh and strict. She thought kids should enjoy things like theater and music and poetry. and being in nature, of course.
Yeah.
And she really valued qualities like humility and gentleness and being genuine, like not putting on a fake persona. She thought real dignity and virtue came from the heart, not just from your head.
So it's about being a whole person, right?
Exactly.
But we have to remember, all this is happening in the late 1700s. You mentioned before there was all this talk about a moral crisis. People were worried society was going downhill. And some of this was influenced by Rousseau, right?
Oh, yeah, Rousseau was a big deal back
And
then.
totally. And then you have people freaking out about population decline. It was a time of big changes. And then bam, the French Revolution happens.
Talk about a shakeup.
For sure.
Yeah.
And in a way, the whole revolution was about moral and political reform. Like people thought they could create a better society. And education was a big part of that. They thought if you could educate people the right way, you could change the world.
Yeah, there was a lot of hope and idealism around education at the time.
Totally. And this is where Wollstonecraft's vindication of the rights of woman comes in. Because she was directly responding to this guy, Talleyrand, who proposed that girls in France should only be educated at home.
Yeah, he didn't think they needed a formal education.
Right. And Wollstonecraft, she thought this was completely messed up. She saw it as a huge injustice. It was like they were saying women weren't even part of the revolution. She's like, hello, if you're going to change society, you have to include everyone.
It was a major blind spot in the whole revolutionary project.
Totally. And she goes even further. She's like, look, men can't really become morally better if they're still treating women like crap. She even said something like, virtue can only flourish among equals. It's like she's saying we're all in this together.
It's a powerful idea. And it's still relevant today. You mentioned earlier how studies show that educating women leads to a better society for everyone.
It's so true. She was way ahead of her time. Okay, so now let's switch gears a bit and talk about her moral and political writings. And of course, we have to talk about her famous feud with Edmund Burke. It's like the intellectual smackdown of the century.
Yeah, it was a battle of the titans.
So Wollstonecraft, she gets her feet wet in the political scene by writing a review of Richard Price's discourse on the love of our country. And she's totally on board with Price's ideas. She loves his whole rational take on patriotism and his emphasis on universal benevolence, like the idea that we should care about all people, not just our own little tribe.
Yeah, she was a big believer in that.
Totally. And she also agreed with Price's critiques of the 1689 settlement and his support for the American and French revolutions. She was definitely a reformer, not a status quo kind of person.
Definitely not afraid to challenge the establishment.
For sure. But then she goes and writes A Vindication of the Rights of Men in 1790. And this is her response to Burke's reflections on the revolution in France. And let me tell you, this was a big deal. It's like she's throwing down the gauntlet. And with this book, she officially becomes a major voice in the political world.
She's stepping into the ring.
Absolutely. So what was all the fuss about? What were they arguing over?
Well, the big disagreement was about the nature of society and political power. Wollstonecraft and Price, they were on the side of reason and progress. They thought you could use reason to make government and society better, make it more fair and transparent.
So they're like the optimists, right?
Yeah, exactly. But Burke, he was more of a traditionalist. He thought society was this complex organism that you can't just mess with. He believed in tradition, experience, and slow, gradual change. He was really suspicious of all this talk about natural rights and abstract principles.
So he's the voice of caution, the guy saying, hey, slow down, let's think this through.
Exactly. And Wollstonecraft, she goes right at him. She accuses him of being so obsessed with the aristocracy and the monarchy that he can't see all the suffering that's going on in society, all the poverty and injustice. She's like, dude, open your eyes.
It's like she's calling him out for being out of touch.
Totally. And she also points out that he's being inconsistent. Like he was all gung-ho for the American Revolution, but then he freaks out about the French Revolution. She's like, what's the deal with that?
She's pointing out the hypocrisy.
Exactly. And she makes this really important point about rights and duties. She says, yeah, okay, rights come with responsibilities, but you can't expect people to fulfill their duties if their basic rights aren't being respected in the first place. It's like she's saying you can't have one without the other.
It's a two-way street.
That's right. And then she uses Hume's History of England to argue that we shouldn't just blindly follow tradition. She says we have to constantly question our institutions and make sure they're actually serving justice and upholding people's natural rights. It's all about holding power accountable to reason.
She's not afraid to question authority. And speaking of authority, she really goes after Burke's whole obsession with politeness. She thinks it's all a facade. She's like, this whole culture of politeness is just a way for rich people to cover up their hypocrisy and greed. And then she basically calls Burke a fake patriot. She's like, I'm the real patriot because I'm willing to speak the truth even when it's uncomfortable.
Talk about throwing shade.
Oh, yeah, she's not holding back.
Mm.
And then she does something really interesting in Rights of Men. She starts talking about family life. She goes off on arranged marriages and people getting married late in life. She thinks it's a recipe for disaster, morally speaking. She's like, if you raise girls to be nothing but pretty little dolls, then you're setting society up for failure. She's saying that the family is where it all starts. If the family's messed up, then society's messed up.
It's like she's saying the personal is political.
Absolutely. And it's almost like she's going beyond Price in a way. Price was all about the rights of men, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Wollstonecraft, she's saying, hold on a second. If you want a truly moral society, you have to address the whole issue of how men and women relate to each other.
Mm.
You have to change the family structure.
She's taking it to a whole new level.
Totally. And this leads right into the vindication of the rights of woman. This is where she makes her big argument that if you want to fix society, you have to fix the way women are treated. She says women are being denied their full potential because they're being raised with all these false expectations. They're being told they're only good for being wives and mothers. And she's like, no, women are capable of so much more.
She wanted to unleash their full potential.
Exactly. And her vision is for women to be rational and independent. She wants them to know that their worth comes from inside, from their minds and their hearts, not from how they look or what men think of them.
She's basically saying, women, be yourselves. Embrace your intelligence, your strength, your individuality.
I love it. And she doesn't just talk about it. In Rights of Women, she lays out a whole plan for how to make things better. She wants to change the way girls are educated. She wants them to have the same rights as men, like the right to vote and own property. She even wants them to have their own representatives in government. And she's not just thinking about fancy ladies. She's worried about working-class women, too. She wants them to have job training so they can support themselves.
She was thinking about economic justice as well.
Absolutely. And she wants women to have control over their own bodies. She thinks midwifery should be a profession for women, not men. And she even thinks women should be allowed to be doctors. She's like, why not?
Yeah, she's breaking down all these barriers.
Totally. And get this. She even has radical ideas about marriage. She thinks marriage should be based on friendship and mutual respect, not just physical attraction. She even thinks women should be able to say no to sex within marriage. I mean, this is the 1700s.
She was really pushing boundaries.
For sure. And ultimately, she wants women to be full citizens. She thinks women should be able to participate in politics and be involved in all aspects of society. And she hates all this superficial stuff that's going on in 18th century society.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all this consumerism and obsession with status and stuff. She's like, we need to get back to basics.
She was a big critic of consumer culture, and she even drew on Adam Smith for some of her arguments, which is interesting.
Yeah, I never thought about that. So it sounds like she had this whole comprehensive vision for a better society. But then she goes to France, and her life gets super complicated. She has this passionate affair with this guy, Imlay, and they have a daughter together. But then he dumps her, and she tries to commit suicide. It's like all this heartbreak and disappointment really changes her perspective. You can see in her book letters written during a short residence in Sweden, Norway, and Denmark.
Yeah, that book is more introspective, more personal. It's almost like she's wrestling with these big questions about reason, imagination, and the passions.
She's not just talking about theory anymore. She's living it.
Exactly. And it's interesting because in some ways she starts to sound more like Burke. Like she's worried about the dangers of too much commercial wealth.
Yeah.
And she's not as critical of England as she was before. It's like seeing the chaos of the French Revolution up close made her appreciate some of the stability of England.
It's like she's gone through this whole transformation. So it's clear that she was way more than just a political thinker.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. People tend to focus on her political writings, but she was a philosopher in the truest sense of the word.
So let's talk about that side of her. Let's explore Wollstonecraft, the philosopher beyond politics.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so we know she wrote those big political treatises, but she also wrote over 200 reviews for the Analytical Review. And in those reviews, she talks about all sorts of philosophical stuff, aesthetics, theory of mind, epistemology. And then you have her letters, where she's reflecting on all sorts of things. She was clearly a deep thinker.
Yeah, she wasn't just a political activist. She was a true intellectual.
So what does she have to say about aesthetics? You know, beauty and art and all that?
Well, a lot of her ideas about aesthetics come from her critiques of this guy, William Gilpin. He was a writer and artist who was really into the picturesque. And Wollstonecraft, she thought he was way too focused on rules and formulas. She thought beauty was more subjective, more personal, like what one person finds beautiful, another person might not. And she thought it was really hard to explain taste. Like, you can't just
Mhm.
put it into words. And she thought this was a problem for artists because they're always trying to capture beauty, but it's like this slippery thing that you can never quite grasp.
So she's saying beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, kind of. But she also thought there was a connection between beauty and truth. Like, she thought true beauty had a moral dimension. It wasn't just about what looked pleasing.
So it's not just superficial.
Exactly. And she was really interested in the relationship between reason and imagination. She didn't think they were separate things. She thought they worked together. And she thought art, especially poetry, should make people think. It shouldn't just tell them what to think. It should provoke them, challenge them.
So art should be thought-provoking, not just pretty.
Exactly. And she even used aesthetic principles in her own writing. Like, in her letters, she describes both the beauty of nature and the ugliness of poverty in a way that's designed to make the reader feel something. Some scholars call this anti-aesthetics. It's like she's using beauty to critique society and make people care about injustice.
Wow, that's pretty clever.
Uh,
What about her ideas on theory of mind? Like how we understand other people's thoughts and feelings.
Well, her theory of mind is kind of scattered throughout her work. It's not like she wrote a whole treatise on it, but she was definitely interested in it. Like, she was frustrated with the whole debate about free will. She thought it was too simplistic. She believed that people's actions were shaped by their upbringing and their habits, not just by some abstract force called will. She was a big believer in self-control. Like, she thought that was the key to being a good person.
So it's not just about having free will, it's about using it wisely. And what about her views on emotions? Love, anger, all that stuff.
Mm.
I mean, she was clearly a passionate person herself.
Yeah, she had a lot to say about emotions. She didn't think they were bad. She thought they were part of being human. But she thought reason should be in charge. Like, emotions shouldn't be allowed to run wild. And she made a distinction between higher emotions like love and lower emotions like lust. She thought the lower emotions were a sign of a lack of self-control. She thought people should strive for the higher emotions, the ones that were more noble and refined.
So it's all about channeling your emotions in the right direction.
That's a good way to put it.
And finally, what about her epistemology? Her theory of knowledge.
Well, she was heavily influenced by Locke, Hume, Smith, Rousseau, the whole gang, but especially Locke. Like, in her book Original Stories, she's basically saying that morality is something you learn through experience, through developing good habits. It's not something you're born with.
So we're not born good or bad, we learn to be good or bad.
Yeah, that's the basic idea.
So she was clearly a brilliant and original thinker. But how was her work received back in her day? And what's her legacy?
Well, honestly, she didn't get a lot of support from the big intellectuals of her time. Even Godwin, her husband, wasn't that impressed with her at first. And a lot of the other big women writers were kind of hesitant to publicly support her. She was often ridiculed and attacked, especially for her personal life. It wasn't really until the late 20th century that people started to take her seriously as a philosopher.
Yeah, it's a shame that her personal life overshadowed her work for so long.
It is. And then after Godwin published his memoirs about her, it got even worse. People were really judgmental about her unconventional life choices. And then Mill came along with the subjection of women, and she kind of got forgotten for a while.
Like she got lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, kind of. But despite all that, her work was still being read and discussed, especially in America and Europe. There were even translations of her work in Brazil. And she had a big influence on later feminist thinkers like Flora Tristan and Auguste Comte. And even in England, despite all the Victorian prudishness, her ideas helped pave the way for the suffrage movement.
So she was planting seeds, even though she wasn't always getting the recognition she deserved.
Exactly. And then in the 20th century, with the rise of second-wave feminism, she was rediscovered. People started calling her the mother of feminism. Simone de Beauvoir even gave her a shout-out in The Second Sex. But at first, people were mostly interested in her as a historical figure. The first feminist.
Like she was this symbol of early feminist struggle.
Exactly. But more recently, scholars have started to take a closer look at her work in its historical context. And they're realizing that she was more than just a feminist. She was a serious philosopher who was grappling with some really big questions about human nature and society.
It's like they're finally seeing her for the brilliant thinker she was.
Exactly. And her work is still relevant today. Like Amartya Sen, the economist, has cited her work on social justice. And her ideas about freedom and equality are still central to both liberal and Republican political thought. And she's also having a resurgence in feminist philosophy. People are using her ideas to talk about autonomy, education, even ecofeminism.
Yeah.
And there's a whole new interest in her views on motherhood.
It's like she's speaking to us across the centuries.
She really is, and there's even a whole new wave of scholarship looking at her philosophical and theological influences. People are studying her relationship to Kant, Burke, Plato, even Rousseau, and there's a growing recognition of her critique of capitalism and her contributions to economic thought. And get this, people are even studying the images and symbols that were used to represent her and how those images have shaped how people understand her.
So she's become this multi-layered figure.
Exactly. And what's really impressive is how she was always engaging with the big ideas of her time. She was reading everything, debating everything, and constantly refining her own thinking.
She was a true intellectual powerhouse.
She really was. And she was always concerned with this big question. How do we create a society where everyone can flourish?
That's a question we're still grappling with today.
It is.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that Mary Wollstonecraft was a remarkable figure. She was a writer, a thinker, a reformer, a feminist, and she left behind a legacy of ideas that continue to inspire and challenge us today.
She certainly did.
So here's a final thought for you to ponder. Given Wollstonecraft's evolving views on commerce and inequality, how do you think she would view the world today? What would she say about our obsession with consumerism and the growing gap between the rich and the poor? And what parts of her message about reason and virtue do you think are most important for us to remember today? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.